We are live. Hello, everyone. Just getting there, clicking a couple of buttons, and then I think we'll be all set. Okay. Robin is here to moderate, so that means if you're having any trouble with the chat or the feed, she'll let you know what to do. Anytime you sometimes the internet goes weird. If you can't hear me or see me, reload your browser before you try anything else. That's usually the main thing that will fix it. You can hit that little reload button, or Control R does it as well. And you can see and hear me. That's good news. I cannot see or hear you, but I can see the chat, and I'm sure happy to be here to talk about critiques today. We try to do this once a month with our Fearless Artist community members to do a critique session. This is an opportunity for you to request feedback on your work from me. And it's an opportunity for me to help you learn how to critique your own work, which is really important to me. I know often when students start in the Fearless Artist community, often you're kind of I sometimes hear from people saying, I thought Angela would be, telling me more what she thinks of my paintings than she is. And I actually deliberately kind of hold back from sharing too strongly my own opinions of your work, even giving advice, because it's really important to me that I don't steer you wrong. I don't steer you away from the artist you're meant to be. And, I have things that I love seeing in my own paintings. They're things that draw me to other artists' work, but they are based on my own personal taste and preferences. And so if I were to talk too much or emphasize some of the things that really resonate with me really strongly, I might actually be distracting you from the beautiful diversity, the things that resonate with you. And I really don't want to do that. I want you to be able to listen to that little voice in your heart that is connecting you to your own most authentic work, that helps you identify the art you love in others, stuff that makes your heart sing. And it's amazing how we get to be unique and different. We're all drawn to different things, and what we love and prefer changes over time. If you had asked me 10 or 15 years ago if I would be painting what I'm painting now, I would have just thought it was ridiculous. I've gotten way looser than I ever thought I would be. I'm drawn very much to abstracts. That whole messy splatter intuitive painting process that for me sometimes says I don't know what it is, but I like it, I'm going to frame it. So it's been neat to see how my journey has changed and digressed from what I thought that I wanted. And many years ago, I thought that I would become a botanical painter, be very realistic and detailed. I'm very far from that. And I love that I allowed myself to follow this path and to allow the journey to transform me and to even change my tastes and preferences. And so that's kind of been something that's really special for me to be able to look back and see how that's happened. I want you to be able to look back that way too. Now, a little bit about critiquing work, because I think critique is actually an unfortunate choice of words, because we hear the word critique and we think criticism. And really, a critique should be very far from criticism. It should be, and maybe there's a dictionary definition of critique that actually is more accurate. But culturally, when we hear the word critique and we hear criticism, we think, sorry, my kid's school is calling, but I'm going to ignore it. If we hear the word critique and we think, just bear with me while I get my train of thought back. We think negative things. So whether or not the dictionary gives us a more accurate depiction of critique doesn't matter so much as what we kind of associate with it. And so we want to reframe our thoughts around critique. We want to understand what the purpose of a critique is, so it doesn't turn into a bloodbath where you're just dissecting your work and finding everything that's wrong with it. That is not what we're here for. And I think actually when it comes to receiving a critique, I know what I always wanted to hear from another artist was is my work good? Is my work worthy and valuable? And is my work of value? I don't like the word valuable either. Does my art have value? And unfortunately, I was looking for that determination from others. And it's really funny when it comes to receiving feedback from others, because we will glom onto that negative thing that they say. We'll hear a negative criticism and it just totally ends up defining the whole painting. But when someone praises our work, we tend to qualify their praise in our heads. So they'll say, oh, this is so beautiful and compelling. And we think, yeah, but you didn't notice the mistake over in that corner. Or we'll think, yeah, but you really don't know what you're talking about because you're my best friend, or stuff like that. So we're really bad at receiving criticism from others, because bad criticism just devastates us. Good criticism we tend to discount. We're a little biased, and that's unfortunate, because we miss out in that case on some really on really growing our work, because we don't know how to hear praise. And we also don't know what to look for when it comes to criticism. So that's what we're here for today, is to do a little bit of learning in regards to critiquing our work. I have a document that you can print off. We've posted it in the community. Robin will share a link in the chat here on how to critique yourself, how to look at your work with the right kind of critical eye, to look for what's working. How can I make my weak areas stronger? How does my viewer going to experience the painting? What are my emotions around this piece? And so those are important things to think about as we critique our work. And I thought I would start this session by showing you some of my recent work and kind of self-critiquing it for you. So we're going to switch the camera over to my work surface. And I'm going to show you an assortment of paintings that I've done over the last week or two. And some of them are finished, some of them are unfinished, some of them are sketches and studies. And all of that kind of comes from the choices I make to critique my work. So Evelyn, you'll recognize this sketchbook here. I did 2 studies in it. I think I did this one on our last week's Tuesday session. And then immediately after the video ended, I went and did a second version for my own development. I like to do that. They're in the sketchbook, so they're not going to get framed or anything, but it's just, and that can actually be very freeing when you have a sketchbook, because it's going to stay in there. It's for your learning purposes. It gives you that freedom to, hopefully it gives you that freedom to play and explore a little bit more than you might if you feel like it's something you want to frame. I also did a version of my Montreal landscape. This one I used both pages of the sketchbook, so clearly I really can't frame it. Even if I were to cut it out, it would have a big seam in the middle. But I really had that freedom to kind of explore. And I didn't finish it. My goal in this, and I was a little bit influenced by Mark Holmes, who always, when he's out plein air painting, he does his painting in one sitting, and he rarely goes back to the studio and adds anything to it, except maybe some sky. So I wanted to do this in one sitting. So I'm looking at this now, and I'd really like to actually darken the side here, this building, and I'd like to maybe put a darker shadow down this side. I think that would bring your eye really into the center of the painting. So I'm thinking about how I experience the painting. Where does my eye go? And are there areas that distract? And right now I feel like the paler shape in here, it's almost like a U shape. There's a lot of paler colors in that kind of middle value range. And my eye kind of wanders around because I'm not grounded by as grounded by strong contrast as I could be. There are strong darks here that pull me into the painting, and I did that deliberately. But I'd almost like to counter those with some darks here, rather than these light and dark whites, and then the middle value medium kind of color spaces, medium color spaces. So I don't think I need to be Mark Holmes and have that rule that I never go back to a painting. It actually, I learn a lot when I take a painting like this and I say, you know what, I'm not going to finish it, or I'm not going to frame it as it is, so I might as well throw some more paint at it and see if I can't strengthen some of those things that bother me a little bit. in this case making these areas darker, it's going to teach me a lot. And because I was working, because as I painted this, I knew that I wanted to darken these areas if I were to go over them again. I ended up taking that whole concept, that idea of darkening the sides, to this painting. And this one actually was a first layer wash that I found in my drawer of unfinished paintings. And I decided I was going to add some strong darks to it to create an imaginary, well, I shouldn't say imaginary. It was slightly influenced by the urban landscape I've been painting, the same reference photo over and over again. But then as I started to paint it, you know, my building shapes changed from that original photo. I gave myself permission to take it in a new direction. And I started imagining kind of a narrow street in downtown Vancouver, thinking about, I've spent a little bit of time in Vancouver, but not very much. I hinted at a car parked over here. It kind of feels like a night scene. And I was really just putting these dark gray, they're gray colors over top of my first layer wash. And that first layer had some brusho on it. It had this neon green, which had no relation to the reference image in my head. And it was really fun to kind of explore that. This painting I really like. I don't know why I really like it. And I tend to pay attention to my emotions when it comes to a painting. I don't have to analyze the composition too critically. If my emotions say I really like this and I don't know why, that comes first. And so whether or not somebody else understands it is really secondary, or third or fourth or fifth. It's down on the list. It's not very high. So so I like the feel of this. I'm unlikely to frame it just because, well, I tend to categorize my work. I have paintings that are development pieces. I have paintings that I might post publicly, might even consider selling. I have other pieces that I would submit to competitions. Everything kind of gets tiered into different categories. I'm never really sure. Often when there's a call for an art exhibition to enter work, then I go through my paintings and I go with whatever feels most appropriate for the subject matter and the audience that's going to be looking at it. So this one's just a study, and it's one that feels like I'm growing in my confidence and learning, and I think that's one reason my emotions around it are so good. I'm still figuring out how I feel about it too a little bit. This was a exploration from early last week, and it makes me very happy, except this irritates me a little bit. It's so strong and dark that your eye just goes there and is trying to figure out what that dark shape is. Because that dark shape is so dominant, we don't really see the two tiny deer that I painted over here. And so I think what I really should do in order to make this painting work just a tiny bit better is, and I think I might have painted this one on video as well, and then I went back in and added details, but I need to counter this dark with a similar dark somewhere else so that it's not so magnetic to the viewer. We kind of have a strong dark here, we kind of have a strong dark over here. I think a similarly sized mark over here, maybe if I darken, I don't know if I should darken the deer and maybe a tree coming up here, that might balance it out just a little bit better. But I really pay attention to that when I look at and critique a painting. Where does my eye go first? Does my eye rest there? Is it drawn back to that every time I try to look around the painting? Or is my eye bouncing from place to place? You know, what's the real point of, I don't know, what's the hook, I guess? Where does my eye feel like it's just pulled to that spot? And if there's competing elements, you know, if sometimes a strong element like this will have another strong element somewhere else, and you can't figure out which one's most important, and then your eye's bouncing back and forth, that's not good either. So I try to have, you know, one area that is the most, you want your hook to be at the focal point. So, you know, I want the eye to go to these deer. I don't want them to go here. So I need to figure out a way to make the deer work better. Maybe just a strong, let's try it. We're talking it out. I might as well try it. Let me see if I can find a brush. And I've got the gray nearby. I've been using Joseph Zbukvik's Cool Gray. It's made by Daniel Smith. They came out with a bunch of gray colors last year, inspired by some of our watercolor masters. And that's the wrong brush. And I'm really liking the Cool Gray. It's got cobalt teal, it's got quin violet, and it's got lamp black in it. Well, you know how I feel about cobalt teal. So that makes it really blend well with the paintings that I do that include cobalt teal, just like this one has a lot of cobalt teal in it. And for some reason it watermarks really beautifully, so we have really nice washes with it. You can drip color over top. And I'm just trying to make some wispy trees. And I'm trying to make that strong dark edge work. There's some really fine little dark branches here, so maybe we'll make a few more of those. Just pull that tree up a bit. I really try not to make my paintings so precious that I can't go in and tweak something later on. And it's kind of, for me, I know that if I mess this one up, I can make something, I'm becoming a better artist all the time. I will make something beautiful again. And you will too. If you keep painting and growing, your art is going to get better and better. You might be at a beginner stage where it's really hard to be predictable in what you're painting. You know, you have a happy accident where something goes really well the first time, and then you try to do it deliberately and it just doesn't work. But you will, if you don't quit, you don't give up, you will get to the point where you can do really beautiful things on purpose. We start out by doing them accidentally, then trying to do them on purpose, and then eventually we can master that as well. So let's see if that doesn't work just a little bit better. Maybe one more strong splash of dark. We want to bring the eye over here instead of having it anchored there. Now the other thing I could do is if these two start competing with each other, I could go in and try to lift some of the color there and make it a little paler. I don't want to rush to doing that because I feel like whenever we start to fuss over an area, the more time you spend in one place, the more likely that is to become your focal point. They just that because it gets that overworked feel, and it just does. The more time you spend somewhere, the more important that part of that scene becomes. So that means when you have an area that bothers you maybe a little bit, you know, maybe I don't like this mark over here. If I spend too much time trying to fix it, it's going to become the first thing the viewer sees as well. And so we don't want them lost over in one corner of the painting when we want their eye over here. So it's almost better to spend more time in the focal point area than trying to fuss to reduce the impact of a non-focal point part of the painting. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's quickly go through the rest. This is turning long, and I still want to share and look at some of your work. This is something I was working on yesterday. I want to go back in and paint a sky. And it's pretty overworked in some places. I got really, I started painting the tree and then it started getting lost in the dark background. So I wanted to make it pop forward a little bit more again. So I started adding yellow. I started adding a little bit of opaque colors to try to lighten some spots. The good news is because the tree is basically the focal point, fussing around it a little bit isn't going to distract from the main thing, because this is the main thing. And because I have given myself permission to, you know, fiddle around and play and experiment, if this one ends up feeling too overworked, then I will try again with a different painting. The main thing I want to do with this, I was just working on it last night. I haven't decided how I feel about it yet. I'm giving myself time to kind of analyze. I want to go in and paint a little sky here. And I'll have to use a really light touch because of course I've got the spatter here, and I don't want to fuss with the spatter. I really like all those little drips that are there. I don't want them to get all smudged and smeared, so I'm gonna have to be really gentle as I add in that sky. And I am known for this, starting with the focal point, and then I have to figure out a background later. And that's kind of my working method. It seems to work for me, even though it does also present a problem with having to now paint the sky in. But I usually find a workaround, so I'm not too worried about it. I was also going through my drawer looking for what I might plan to frame in the future. I found this painting, which makes me happy. It's got this interesting kind of detailed edge with a lot of crisp marks, and then a lot of softness over here, which could feel like it doesn't match what's happening over here. But whenever I pull it out of my drawer, my stack of paintings that I'm not really sure how I feel about, I really kind of like it. I think the yellow over here balances really well. We have this beautiful kind of movement. If we look at the yellows and how it moves the eye through the painting, we do have crisp edges here, and they go kind of along the diagonal here. And then there's a few little crisp edges here and here, and those are not as composed, I guess, because I didn't spend a lot of time with my brush placing them. They just kind of happened in that loose wash, and so they're quite organic feeling, but they help bring the eye to this part of the painting rather than us getting stuck over here. We do kind of bounce over to these white spaces and then bounce back again. Let's just move onward. Oh, this one I wanted to share just because it made me laugh. Last week, I was playing with that beautiful cool gray, Joseph Z's cool gray from Daniel Smith, and I made this mark right here. And to me, it looked like one of those fancy ornate bonnets that women would wear in the Victorian era. And so I decided I was going to try to paint a Victorian lady. It's a crazy thought because I never paint people, but I started kind of drawing out the shape of maybe the side of her face in shadow. And then I got those puffed sleeves in and a skirt. And then I saw a little dog in a random mark, so that I put a little dog on her lap. And then I decided she needed a spouse, so we placed her husband over here. And he's got a whiskery beard and a bit of a soldier's uniform. He's got boots here and his hat, and then that very strong stance with his shoulders very broad. And when I posted it on Instagram, someone said he was holding a raven. I'm not really sure if that's this mark or over here, but that made me laugh. This is something that's just for fun, and I don't have to critique it. I don't have to analyze it. It was a really good way of exploring color and shape, painting something that I ordinarily wouldn't feel like I could do. And I like making time in my painting practice for those playful things. This isn't something I would ask another artist to critique either. This is just something that I do for me. And so not every painting that I do needs to be, analyzed and broken down. It's just, but I do still recognize that it's teaching me something, it's growing my skills. And then I wanted to show you what I've been working on over the last couple of days. My neighbors, I have great neighbors. They've been driving my kids to school every day this year because they've got smaller kids that go to the same school. And so she comes and picks up my children in the morning, and she's just marvelous. And they live in this house down in the river valley, and it's the most beautiful view. You can stand up here and just look over the valley. And so I wanted to paint something for them. This is a development piece because I'd like to actually do a full sheet watercolor for them. So I'm working out the plan, and I'd like to do it in the autumn. We're in winter right now, and so we don't have a lot of color going on. So I have to teach myself now how to paint their river valley, how to try to get their house in there without it looking stiff. And I really don't like this. I'm not feeling good about it. The colors that are here are really nice. I like a lot of the positioning of the elements here. I like the little lines and marks that I'm placing. So I feel like this has promise, but this is unresolved, and I have to teach myself how to paint that before I can confidently attack it in a bigger version. Now, the other thing I did with this was I did a version in winter. And look at this. This makes me so happy, and I kind of wish that this is the one I could give them. Not 100% sure they would understand it. This is the powdered graphite that I've mentioned previously. I wanted to do a value study as I got to know the reference photo. So this was intended to be a value study. And I came into the studio and I thought, what if I just sprinkled a zigzag of graphite powder as my value study and challenged myself to then draw out from those graphite shapes that sprinkle of powder, the river valley. And so I did that, and it was really fun. And then I was having such a good time that I did drop in a little bit of color, some lavender up here, and some zoisite, and I think some burnt sienna. And that felt fantastic. I really love this painting. Whether or not I give it to them for their Christmas present, I think I'm going to have to frame it. It works because of my emotions around it. It works because it conveys a certain mood to me. It works because we've got some strong contrasts that move the eye through the painting. We've got some artistic license that gives us a feeling of personality in the scene. And we've got something that I'm very captivated by, almost a feeling like a lot of this painting happened without the intervention of the artist. And that's something I really have been drawn to lately, is this idea that parts of your painting almost look like watercolor did it by itself. And I love seeing that feeling. I mean, I've talked about this before. Sometimes we see beauty in nature in a tangle of leaves and fallen branches, and it looks like art, even though we know it's just randomly fallen, piles of logs or whatever, or the sunlight casting this interesting shape on a stump, and we know nobody put those things there, and we're drawn to that beauty. And so I love being able to kind of grab a little bit of that in my art. It's something that motivates me, and knowing that about myself helps me to choose that approach when I'm painting. And so it's a really good idea to spend time thinking about what you find beautiful and are drawn to, and so that you can build more of that into your paintings. So that's a little bit about what I've been working on lately. Hopefully that gets you thinking as you think about your own work and what you're drawn to. And it's really exciting for me to take a risk in my paintings. That's something else that I like to look for. When I take a big risk, I feel like a fancy artist. I feel like almost a creative superhero. I'm going to do something really bold and know that I can make it beautiful. And it's really exciting for me to be in that place in my creative journey. Okay, Burnt Sienna. I like that name. Is that like Burnt Sienna? I like it. Just reading the chat. We are going to take a look at some of your work as well here. And again, I have the critique document. I'm just going to go over it just very briefly. As you think about critiquing your own work, what I'm going to be doing in the next few minutes is just sharing some of my thoughts about your paintings. It really helps me when you share a description that talks a little bit about what you see in the painting, maybe what your goals were, what you liked or disliked, or what you struggled with. That helps me to give feedback that's appropriate to your level and to your goals for the work. I really think it's important not to critique your work immediately after painting. I will look at my painting and either it'll be the best thing I ever made or the worst in the moment after I've been staring at it for who knows how long trying to make it work. And so I really need to detach and come and see it with fresh eyes so that my emotions about the piece aren't quite so strong. Sometimes I'll have a painting and the excitement of painting it will be so strong that I can't that later I'll come back and go, maybe that's painting's a little bit weak. But I didn't realize it in the moment because I was just so excited about some of the stuff I was learning. But maybe it just needs to be developed and strengthened more. If I've struggled to fix a painting and make it work, then my emotions might be primarily negative. Rather than seeing all the strengths in the painting, I'm just focused on the problems. So I like to give myself the opportunity to look at a painting after a day or so has gone by, and then after several days, look at it again, and then after several weeks. If you can hang your work in your studio or have it in a prominent place where you can see it every day, then you get the cumulative feeling of, how does this painting make me feel every time I see it? And that's really helpful. I want to be surrounded by art that makes me happy every single day. And so, I can feel whether or not that happiness quotient is maintaining or growing, or if it's decreasing as I, see that painting and get familiar with it. And I have art in my home that makes me happy every single day. And I just love it because it's alive to me. The critique document that you can download isn't a strict checklist. You are not a vehicle inspector where you have to go down every item on the list and check it off. Rather, I would encourage you to focus on just certain parts of it at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself by just completely taking the joy and the poetry out of your work by dissecting it. My kids are studying poetry in school right now, and they hate it. They would much rather enjoy poetry without having to analyze it, because it kind of does take the joy away. Okay, so the other thing I want to remind you of is that if your painting is working as a whole, the small mistakes don't matter. We want to evaluate the entire painting and our journey through it, not just that one area that you struggled with. Is that one thing in proportion or not? People don't care about the mistakes you made in your art. What they care about is how that art makes them feel. So we're focusing on the emotions first of all. Few other things to think about as well. A lot of times I was showing you some development pieces that I've been working on. These are paintings where I'm taking a new subject, something I haven't painted before, and I know that I'm not going to be able to get my strongest work in that first attempt, and maybe not in the second attempt. And so I want to be aware that the more preparation I put into a painting, the stronger my decision making is going to be. And so if you're critiquing a painting and it's your first version of that subject, let your critique lead you to part 2, to the next logical step. Maybe you look at it and realize your values are weak and you need to spend some time doing value studies and figuring out where the contrasts need to fall. That's a good thing to know because it gives you a direction to take the next step. So use your critique to help you choose a direction. If you're not going to paint the subject again, I would encourage you to still do that kind of critiquing where, I need to strengthen my ability to work with values. So I'm going to spend more time on value studies in my next painting that I do, even if it's a completely different subject. And I want you to also think about how you felt as you painted. How we feel shows in our work. When I'm feeling excited, willing to take a risk, feeling like I can do no wrong in my painting, my choices are going to be bolder, more confident. My brush handling is going to be more confident. Everything's going to, my intuition's going to just translate onto the paper just a little bit better than when it's a struggle. So I can be aware of that as well. And that's also why I take that time to warm up and really spend time getting in that zone where I do feel free to paint based on kind of what my heart wants to do. Okay, let's switch over to our student work here that you've posted in the community. When you post your work with the hashtag critique, when we do these critique sessions, that's what I look for. I've tried to choose paintings that have been posted within the last week or two, so that, if you're, so that you're still thinking about those pieces and wanting to grow from those. So here we go. We're going to start with Kathleen's. And it's just, we're going to just take a look at it for a second. Kathleen, I really like the composition here. And I have some notes. I'm just going to pull them up because my printer's not working. And so that means I need to use my cell phone to find my notes. So there it is. Kathleen, I really like the composition here. You've got kind of the most action happening at the top of the page with all those marks and the beautiful trees, and then that white space down below balances it out. I love a vertical format for a landscape, so that's just fun for me. Um, and you commented when you posted this that you're painting a cloudy, snowy day, and so everything looks the same colors, and it really does. Cloudy, snowy days are a great opportunity to practice value studies and to work with those subtle washes of color. On a cloudy day, there is still warm and cool. There is still light and dark, but the range might be subtler. And so we can see that here. Your trees are a very cool kind of Payne's gray color, but the grays down below are a little bit warmer. And so we get that different temperature there. And then the sky does have that blue feel. This would be, I liked seeing your mark making here, your intuitive marks that you were making and the freedom that you had there. Keep playing with that and working on that. I would also look for opportunities to create some soft flowing washes. It might be fun to do, to have even more softness in the lower part of the painting, and then come back with those final little dark twigs at the after it's dried. And then you'd get even more of that feeling of that softness that we feel in the winter. I think what really drew us to this was the energy in it. When we see a painting that has this kind of freedom in the mark making, it tells us a little bit about you and your mindset when you painted it, and it's just beautifully appealing. Okay, moving on. Christy, this is Christy Jacobson's, and Christy, this is a beautifully competent painting. We've got a gorgeous diversity of colors. We've got a lot happening in the sky, actually, that you almost miss because we're looking at the landscape, but we can see those streaking clouds across the top of the sky, and then the lower half of the sky has kind of that end of day feeling, or maybe sunrise. It almost feels more like sunrise than the end of the day. It's funny how the lighting, just tiny differences in the lighting give us an idea of time of day. You said in your comment, what I wonder about this painting is if the perspective appears correct, if the lights and darks appear to be in balance, and if the colors are too unnatural. I can see that the darker green grasses under the big bush on the left need to be carried up toward the road and faded out. Excuse me. I wasn't too... I really didn't pay much attention to the grasses in the foreground. They weren't a distraction to me. What I really look for when I'm trying to figure out if a painting's working or not is, where does my eye land? Where does it stay? What am I not maybe paying enough attention to? And our eye goes very much to the building. And the way the road kind of just disappears there, which is a little bit hard to figure out. I think we're seeing mist there. And so then the decision is, does the road fade out too abruptly? I don't worry too much. I wouldn't worry too much about proportion. Everything, every man-made element you place in the scene is going to affect the perspective. Because when it comes to trees, we can have trees of all different sizes, and that's how trees are. But when it comes to fence posts, generally they are a consistent size, and so they should grow smaller consistently as well. And so those are things that we can get really distracted by. And I loved reading an article or an interview with David Hockney, and he was talking about perspective as actually being a negative thing. We don't have to have perfect perspective to have a compelling painting. And so I would encourage you in that. I think this painting is just really beautiful. And so I'm kind of avoiding analyzing it too much. And I hope you're okay with that. I also think that there's a lot going on here. We have little moments of beauty all over the page. Like I said, the sky is absolutely gorgeous. And yet we also know that this painting is also about the mist. And the painting is also about the building and the road and the tree. So we do have a little bit of a feeling of, what's the most important thing? What do I focus on? Because anytime we're putting human elements in, and beautiful, just little areas like this, we want to linger over all of it. Um, and I think that's okay. I think there's a lot of possibility here for future plays on interpretation. Do you simplify the lower half of the painting so that you can emphasize the sky more, and maybe soften and hint at different things more than you have? It's hard, it's hard for me to. I don't want you to take any part of it away. Is my main thought. So it's just how do you explore this further? And one thing you could do, and actually I would suggest you try this at home, is take a mat board, or even just in your computer, experiment with different croppings. You've got a lot of really pretty things happening that give you the opportunity to see the multiple beautiful paintings that there are contained within this one, and maybe explore those on an individual level as well. And I don't feel like the colors need to be toned down or anything like that. I just think they're really pretty. They're you, Christy. I know your style, and so we see your style and your color choices here. Okay, so I've rambled on about that enough. Chuck, you shared a number of pieces, and so I had to pick one. And so I picked this one. It's just a little study that you said was from a reference photo that your wife took, I believe. There it is. Yes, so your wife gave you this painting, and what I really am drawn to in this painting is the strong contrast between light and dark. There is no doubt in my mind that I'm seeing active water, that beautiful sunlight streaming through trees, because you've got contrast in your trees, especially up towards the upper back part of the middle of the painting, upper back middle. That's a thing, right? The only thing I would suggest exploring a little bit is you've added some white paint, I think, to the right side, and I'd love to see what that little part of the painting would look like if you planned ahead a little bit better and left your whites as the white of the paper. The paint feels a little bit thick and heavily layered there, which takes my eye right to that area as a focal point. But I also kind of want to spend time just studying the movement of the water. And so I kind of have been bouncing back and forth between those two different things. And so that's where, say this one area is my focal point. I'm going to really focus on creating contrast there and leaving light values so that I can contrast my dark values against. And it's that little interplay of light and dark that's so compelling in this painting, and so enjoyable to look at. I use opaque colors in my paintings too from time to time, and I enjoy doing it. I think why this feels hard to me is just because we do have a lot of whites in the water, and so the whites of the paint on the paper and the whites of the paper, they're kind of competing with each other just a little bit. But overall, I really think that's got so much great energy. I always like your mark making in your paintings. Diana, you shared this one, and you said your goal for this one was a realistic interpretation, and so you were wondering about perspective as well. Let me just quickly look at my notes here. Yeah, you said you were planning to do more versions of this to follow. Good for you. Love the colors. You've got that wintry coolness very much in the kind of violets, and there's a bit of brown in there in the scene. Now, you were concerned. You said the pond doesn't look right to me. The perspective is off, but I don't know how to do it differently next time. Is it about the horizon line? Should the near and far edges of the pond be shown closer together? I want it to be a realistic depiction, and any input about it is requested. The pond doesn't bother me really here. I'm trying to, I feel like it looks like water. It feels proportional to the scene. The road kind of curves around it in a really nice way. I think one thing I would suggest is maybe trying to paint it with less, paint it softer. There's some really beautiful water effects you can create just by dropping color in wet and wet, and see what it looks like with it just being really soft. And then your trees become all about the mark making. With water, usually we look at the elements that are touching the water and we look for those shapes. So where the water meets the land, we really pay attention to the shapes there. Water should appear to be flat on top, except for where it's kind of cut off by the land. And so at the bottom of the pond, we see kind of a curving shape, and that's depicted well. We often see dark shadows where the land meets the water. And so those are things to pay attention to, and sometimes to exaggerate a little bit as well. And so I think, the other thing I wonder about is I really like the vertical format of your reference photo. But in that vertical format, if you were to change your format in a future version, what I would notice is that the painting almost then becomes about the elements in the foreground, and the pond becomes much less important. It's kind of just that path of twigs almost from the big tree on the back left to the shrubbery in the foreground. And that could be a beautiful painting story as well. There's a lot of possibilities here. And I think starting with that wet and wet, establishing those early shapes is a really good way to set your painting up and get that subtlety in. We're seeing that in your painting of your first layer there in the lower corner. So I think you're on the right track. I think it looks great. We often talk about painting something realistically and thinking that then it needs a lot of layers, and that's not always true. We do have some examples of watercolor artists who do beautiful realistic stuff, and then there are still areas there that are very, very simplified, and that's why I'm encouraging you to do that wet and wet pond rather than painting all the little wavelets and little marks of texture. Keep it very soft and see, just grow your skills in being masterful in that area as a way to create contrast in your painting between detail and simplicity. It makes your paintings more compelling, and so that's something to work on. You're doing well. Evelyn posted this one, and I actually did comment on it in the community, but I wanted to, I thought it was a good example of, well, she had a great question, rather. Evelyn says, I did this first layer at a watercolor workshop in September. Since then, it has been on an easel waiting for me to go to the next strokes. However, I have been so stuck with not knowing how to go further or what to add to it without completely destroying what I've already done. Usually I don't care too much about that, but this one I really like. I feel like it needs something more to enhance the story, but what? Can you help me with some ideas and thoughts? And she also attached an upside down version of the picture in the comments in the community, which is a great idea because we know a painting, a first layer like this, sometimes we don't see anything in that first layer, and then we turn it over and just something new pops out. And I can't tell you how many times I start a painting with first brush marks and an idea in my head of what it's going to be, and then I flip it over and have an even better idea that I just have to pursue. Evelyn, what I really encourage you to do in the comments in the community, and here again, is be willing to wait. Be willing to let the painting suggest its next steps, even if it takes a long time. I rarely do well if I can't see the next step in my head. My painting rarely develops well. And so I will paint something that's simple and quick, but that doesn't mean rushed. I will put those first strokes down, put that first layer down, and I will pause and linger and study it and wait for that next step to suggest itself. When I see the next path, the next adjacent possible thing, I will put that brush stroke in. And sometimes it can take a really long time. One way to encourage the process would be to do maybe some similar loose first layers. I could try different color variations and then develop different ideas over top. I definitely see this could be a stormy sky. and over a field of some kind. So maybe you want to experiment with painting different kinds of fence lines, or laying a tree over the scene. You do that on a separate piece of paper with a similar kind of orientation and format. At then you don't have as much of a risk as painting on something that you really love and messing it up. You can see that natural first step. You're in a place where you've been painting it repeatedly, and so you'll be more ready when that next step does present itself. Joe shared this one, and let me take a look at my questions. Joe, I don't think you had given a great description, so I'm just guessing in the dark here on this critique. But I just wanted to share it because I really liked some of the contrasts that were happening here. We have the mountains, which are quite simplified. My temptation is always to paint all the little white snow caps and all the rocky contours, very detailed, but by simplifying them, Joe has created a frame for the rest of her painting, and so the mountains are less of a focal point and more of a support or a frame. My eye is actually really drawn to the water. We see the white space that she's done with dry brushing here, and it just brings the eye there because again that creates our greatest contrast. The trees are you've painted we can almost count your evergreen trees. They're painted in a row, and we varied the size, and you did a great job of kind of positioning the taller trees so that they have a nice rhythm across the scene, and you have a nice rhythm in even the placement of the rocks in your water. I would look also though for ways of simplifying your trees even more. Try painting them as one mass, maybe with a large wide brush, pulling them across the scene and then pulling some points up out of that large shape. Let some of those colors flow together, and they'll feel a little less rhythmic and a little more distant as well. And we're just one thing I'm really liking here that I just noticed was there's a little hint of the pink from the sky in the water. We know that our water generally does reflect the weather and the sky and the time of day, and so I like seeing that. It kind of unifies the scene, and you do have a really unified painting here, which I really like. There's a lot of harmony between your colors that you've chosen. When you painted your near grasses, you use the same colors as you have in your distant trees. One thing you could do would be to vary your value a little bit, so that your grasses were a little bit paler in that wash. But I'm not sure, you might have been problem solving and covering up an area you didn't like in your water. That I've done that before myself many times. Or one thing you could also do to vary your colors a little bit is that same kind of pale pink color that you used in your sky, you could bring into with your blue as a shadow color, so you'd get a bit more of a violet. Those are different things you can experiment with just to add some diversity and go a little bit deeper in your painting. Candy, you shared this one, and I think your comment was you were working with simple landscapes. This was the 6th of a series. And simple landscapes, I think, offer great opportunity for us to explore kind of working around one idea. So your painting then becomes about, maybe one main thing. So we can decide, is it about the sky? Is it about the land? And then learn what to emphasize and where to place our contrasts. I love your sky here. There's a lot of depth in it. We have some darks at the top, a little bit at the bottom, and then just kind of the clouds in just all those beautiful layers. And I'm drawn to that. One thing I look for in a simple landscape, and I think you could emphasize even more in future versions, would be to vary your proportion of sky to land. So right now it's pretty close to half and half. We see, half sky, half land, and I know that whenever I do that for my painting, my painting feels like it needs more. It needs like a tree in the foreground to break up the rhythm, or a house, or some kind of element that feels more like a focal point. It's just almost too balanced. And so I do, one way to solve that would be maybe to put some fence posts in, and then it becomes like the land is more important, or to put that tree in the foreground like I suggested, or to take your simple landscape and go a 1/3, 2/3 kind of proportion between land and sky. So maybe you have 2/3 of your painting being sky, and then just a thinner, narrow strip at the bottom being your land. Another way to do it would be to give just a tiny bit of sky at the top, and then it becomes all about the landscape. And but then you have to also figure out how to make that main area the most interesting part of the scene, because it's dominating in proportion. But I do feel like whenever my landscape is just a horizontal format like this, we've got a horizontal sky, we've got horizontal land. If I balance it too well, if I'm too successful at kind of getting that balance in there, it does feel like it needs something more. I want to break up that monotony somehow. Not saying your painting's monotonous, because there's a lot to enjoy here, but I always feel like there's just this little something inside of me that says I need just a little bit more than what I see here. So if you're feeling that, those are some strategies you can use to strengthen that. Bring that focal point back into that focal position. Okay, Leela, you have been on fire lately and painting amazing things. I loved what you were saying to me recently about really getting excited about bringing mixed media into your process, that you used to do a lot of charcoal drawing. And so bringing in kind of the graphite powder or charcoal has been very freeing for you. And I'm so excited. That's that kind of mastery growth where you start to, where something new gets drawn into your process, and it just turns something on inside of you. And when that happens, I would really encourage you to pursue that. Your comment when you posted this was that this was your last attempt of this scene. And yeah, you said I used mixed media, I mixed my brushes, and I used my fingers too. I enjoyed painting this scene in a different way and leaving a lot unsaid. What I'm really drawn to in this scene, and you've done a beautiful job of, is making that dome your focal point. Look at those confident windows that are just simple vertical marks. It's just, my eye just wants to stay in that area. Notice that we have while we have a very strong dark in, I think it's a statue in the foreground, but it really kind of points us to the dome, and it echoes the spire on that dome. We also have that warm patch of trees just directly kind of framing that statue directly below the dome. We've got some white there that also kind of brings the eye to that focal point. It's just this has been really beautifully done. Lee's also not spent too much time putting detail around the edges of her painting. When we spend a lot of time painting in the edges, it's really easy to pull the eye again away from the focal point. So those are all things that have been just beautifully done. I can see your many months of hard work in learning how to be kind of free to do your own self-expression. I see it happening for you, and I'm just so excited for you as you step into this next stage. And I hope you get to linger in this place of excitement for a long time before you hit that next kind of obstacle cycle of learning something new. Roberta posted this one. You had posted 2 paintings from a workshop that you took recently. I'm really curious to hear more about your workshop and what was presented and what you learned. This is just a tiny little study on a handmade paper. This is a shepherd, and you said it was started with a burnt sienna underpainting, which I think is fascinating. They often call that grisaille, and it's more of a oil painter's term where you'll do almost your value study underneath the painting, and then you'll build your colors over top. And it's an opportunity to kind of establish your shapes and figure out your values without having to do it on a separate piece of paper. And it is one way to go really dark really soon, because of course the more paint you put on the paper, the less light values we see. but it is also just kind of a fun technique to try. And it gives you that freedom to kind of play with your values. And then if it's working, why not build some color over top? We have a human element, we have our shepherd and our sheep, and then we have our road going off into the distance, which tells a bit of a story. I would love to see you, Robbie, develop this so that we could have more of the road behind the shepherd. Maybe a vertical format would give us more of a sense of distance rather than this wide kind of panorama. And then that would give us that feeling of him being on that journey. Right now, he's just coming into the scene off the edge of the paper, and so it feels almost a little bit kind of abrupt somehow. I don't know why that is, but if he's just a little bit more in the scene, a little further down the road, it gives us it just changes the storyline a little bit, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Placing humans in paintings is actually a really hard thing to do, and it's one reason I kind of avoid painting people. I often get their sizes wrong. Sarah posted this one, and I really liked your description that you had. It gave us lots of detail to know what you were thinking about as you painted this. Sarah says, I like this start on a canyon. I like the colors and the textures, but there seems to be something missing. I'm not sure if I should add some green twiggy bits to the focal area of the canyon, or if I should darken the sky on the upper left. I'm not sure what to do next, or if the composition or the subject is just not interesting enough and I need a better reference photo. This was actually done from memory and not a reference photo. So where do I go next? And this is kind of similar to that simple landscape idea where it's like I just feel like the painting needs something more. And I almost think it might be the same kind of idea where your proportions are too balanced. We almost have an equal amount of sky and canyon in the painting, even though the shape is different, than that straight up horizontal. It does feel to me too like there should be something more. And I think it's a proportion issue. So I think that's what I would encourage you to do is maybe do some thumbnails where you're sketching different orientations, maybe a tall vertical where the canyon's taking up 2/3 of the page, and just a little bit taller, or maybe there's some of the actual flat ground down below showing, or maybe we do one that's mostly sky. Experiment with some different proportional shapes, and I think you'll feel happier with it. I agree with you. I love the texture. I love the clouds. I like the contrast and the way you darken the clouds in the corners. That does bring our eye right to that kind of corner of the canyon. I think it is really just a proportional thing that you get to play with. Wendy posted this one. And you said this was postcard size, I believe. It's first wash. I like the sky. I'm not sure about the trees. Yeah, and I like the sky too. I think you've got this beautiful softness. It really has that kind of wintry palette that feels really good. What I would look for in your trees is they are your place to do something more. And what I like to do is, get that strong, dark trunk in, well, probably a little bit of a paler value than the distant trees. And then feel free to layer a little bit of detail on them to darken and give them some texture and shadow. Use a really fine brush and create and play with your branches and your mark making there. This painting, the sky has that beautiful flow to it. The landscape is quite simplified, and that's great. But then you need to do that extra step of detail in your trees. So I would actually take this study, this first wash, and see what it looks like to place a few more darkest darks onto your trees. We do want to make sure, plan out your values a little bit so that you can have them maybe looking just a little bit paler than those distant trees. They'll pop forward just a little bit more. You might have to do some lifting to make that happen, or actually start with those distant trees just being a little bit paler and then darken them after you've gotten your foreground tree trunks in and everything's dried that first time. Experiment with some different ways of getting that sense of distance and contrast in value between foreground trees and distant trees. And then have some fun exploring your mark making style as you play with how to paint the branches. I do like that a number of your branches are quite pale in value. Those are ones that are always going to feel a little further away. And then you darken a few of the branches to make them feel like they're maybe the nearer branches that might be even pointing at us. And that'll help you create that stronger pattern in the foreground trees. I enjoy painting winter trees because it gives us an understanding of the fundamental tree shapes, which then, of course, in spring and summer and fall, we get to paint. A lot of the branches are obscured in those clusters of leaves. So painting trees in all seasons is really beneficial to help us interpret them with confidence and grace. I think that is everybody on my critique list today. If I missed a painting that you shared in the community, I will be there, throughout the week, and I do look for work to comment on. So anytime you're asking questions and posting your work, you're welcome to use that critique hashtag. And also just good descriptions, good questions help me when I'm going through to be able to give targeted feedback to help you. So keep that in mind as you post your work. And remember, trust yourself. The feelings you have about your art are just as valid as anybody else's opinion of your work. In fact, more so, because you know the artist best. You know your motivations, you know your goals for the work, and you know the emotion you wish to convey and how you actually feel about it. So do really pay attention to that. I'm happy to answer your questions if you have any in the next couple of minutes here, although we are pretty much out of time, and I have a voicemail from my kids' school that I should listen to, just in case, one of them has the flu or something. But they've only called once, so I think it's probably okay. Anytime you're painting, trust yourself. Be willing to believe the best in your work. And it's most of the time, and I don't know if you noticed this, most of the time what our work needs is really very simple. We're working from a small handful of creative techniques and artistic principles that will make our work strong. Where does my eye go first? Where does it stay? And that's usually the area of greatest contrast, where we've got that big dark spot contrasted with the lighter background or whatever. So we look for that, and that helps us understand it. If your goal is realism and you're worried about perspective, that's all about good observation. My perspective feels wrong. I'm not sure why. I'm going to spend more time studying my reference material so I can understand where I went wrong. Maybe my drawing the perspective was off. Maybe my values just need to be corrected slightly. A lot of times it's value and proportional sizing and so forth. So we look for those things. And the more we practice this idea of looking for the strengths in our work and trying to build on those, learning to understand the weaknesses and build and strengthen those, and then also really give yourself permission to work within your ability. If you're a beginner, don't expect professional quality work, but really celebrate those little milestones. Find that artistic brushstroke to love in every painting you create. I have paintings from when I was a teenager that I loved one brushstroke. That looked like a brushstroke that a true artist had made, and I built on that. I let that encourage me and motivate me to paint my next painting. So I really want to encourage you to feel confident that you can do that. You can love your work at no matter what stage you're in. We don't get to rush our readiness for learning that next thing. So let's celebrate where we're at right today. And set goals to grow, yes, but also really celebrate who you are and what you're doing. Thank you for watching. Yes, Shelley, this video, you can watch it again. I know we shared a lot of content. Chuck had a question about how to keep sketchbook pages from sticking together. That's a great question. Chuck, I know you use often some fairly thick consistencies of paint, and sometimes like the gum arabic or binder in watercolor will feel a little bit stickier. What I would suggest, I know Indigo makes their Wiro pads, which have the acetate sheet in between each page, which is a really nice kind of premium kind of little perk of those sketchbooks. But if you don't have that, I like parchment paper. I always bake with it at home, but I keep a roll in the studio as well. And that's really nice for layering between your paintings, whether you're storing them in a drawer in your studio or whether they're in your sketchbook. Just, cut some sheets that match the size of your paper and slip those in between. I think we are wrapping it up. And yes, there was a lot to take in today. Critiquing your work, it's a big scary thing, and having others critique your work is even scarier. But at the end of the day, it's how does my painting make me feel? How do I feel when I look at this painting? And what parts make me happiest? Let's figure out ways to do more of them on the next piece of paper. And that's all I got for you. So thanks for being here today. It's 11:11. I think that means something somewhere. Anyhow, say a prayer for peace, maybe. And have a great day. Bye for now.